It was like I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't think. I couldn't. It was just so horrible. And I said to my mother, I can't go on. I can't go on like this. I just can't. And I never saw her get angry, but she got really angry this time with me. And she was like amazing. And she said, "You can't go on. How do you think I felt when I was in Bergen-Belsen? How do you think that I managed to go on? And then she opened up a little bit about what had occurred. And it really made me realize that you can do anything that you put your mind to, that if you believe that you can, you will.
Welcome, everyone, to 45 Forward. I'm your host, Ron Rowell. Today's episode, I'm talking with Jan Hennick, who is the author of To Enduring Love, which is indeed a love story, and it's an unusual one. It's about her parents, Alexander and Ilona, who grew up in Hungary during the 1930s. Just before the outbreak of the war, the two of them met, fell in love, got married, had a quick honeymoon, and then they were separated for years. They came back together, sort of almost miraculously. And so this is Jan's story about how this happened, but not only that, about how it happened, how they came to America, but what the influence has been on her, and her shaping her views of life, even thinking back many decades. So with all that, let me bring in our guest, Jan Hennick. Jan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ron. I really appreciate the introduction, and I'm ready to answer any questions you have.
Well, I'm happy to have you, and this is a great story. So let's start, with a little bit of drama. I mean, we'll get back to your prologue about your later in life with your dad, but let's go back to that rather almost cinematic moment where your parents had to separate, or they chose to separate. But so let's talk a little bit about how they met and then how they had to separate at the train station
Okay.
in Switzerland.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting was when they met at a movie theater where they both worked. My father was part of an orchestra, and it was like a Radio City type situation, and they would do like a floor show. Yes, in Budapest, and it was the foremost in Budapest. The forum it was called, and my mother was a coat and hat check girl. So this was her first job out of high school, and she was really excited. I mean, up to that point, she had assisted my grandmother in sewing dresses, and in those days they did handmade stuff. So she was like a finisher for my grandmother, who was an excellent seamstress. So they met, and what I found incredible was that she didn't like him. It was just like out of a Jane Austen novel, like Pride and Prejudice. And so she didn't like him because she thought he was too egotistical and too caught up with himself. He was self-centered. And he came on to her, and that's the best way I could describe it. Like, do you want to give me a kiss? It's my birthday. And she was like, she was never had any experiences in love or anything like that. She had lived with with my grandmother, her mother, for all her life, and this was her first job. She was 20 at the time. I mean, actually 19, which she was at the time that she met him. Uh, she was just so blown away that she thought he was incredible in terms of his nerve.
Is this about 1938? Is this when it?
Yes, 1938, the
Okay.
summer of 38.
Okay.
And he saw that she was beautiful. And everybody felt that, other people agreed with him, uh, and whether they were in the orchestra or, other people, that she was really pretty.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. He wanted to be with her. I keep, a visual.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there was somebody else who was courting her, who was not Jewish,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Miklos Fender.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my thing was that she figured that she had to marry Jewish. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't raised religiously,
Right.
but she knew that she had to marry Jewish. I mean, there were things that she went to synagogue, and my
Mm-hmm.
grandmother lit candles or whatever.
Right.
She was not necessarily what you would call religious, but she wanted to marry Jewish. And so she went out with him when he asked her,
Okay.
but she wasn't sure.
Right.
And it was so great that, they got to know each other. So from thinking that he was an egotistical, self-centered person, she found him to be really caring. And then
Mm-hmm.
they fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that love was that they could quote the most romantic poet, Sándor Petőfi,
Mm-hmm.
who was a 19th century poet, who was the most romantic poet. And to her dying day, she could quote him.
Wow.
And, it was truly amazing. So she went from not liking him to actually falling in love.
Wow.
So when he asked her to marry him, she, of course, said yes. And
Okay.
that was like 6 months later.
Wow. The drama is, and also at the time, I remember, when I look at all of these, war movies, I have to say I'm emotionally touched by the separation, and people, you don't know like what's going to happen. Are you going to see this person again? So they get married, but they decide to get married in Switzerland, right? And they go to Bern. Is that right?
No, they married in Hungary. And then, yes, they married in Hungary. And then they went back to their jobs. And she went back to her mother, and he went back to his mother. And that's where he lived. And she lived with her mother. Because in those days, they didn't have like separate apartments and all this other stuff. And they had no money because he was a musician and just earning barely a lot to keep himself alive. So um, his brother, Jenner, who I mentioned in the book, came to her and said, Alex wants to meet you in Switzerland because he has a gig as a musician, and he wants you to meet him at the train station. And that's where she learns that he's going to Switzerland, and he has a ticket for her. So he says, meet me in Switzerland. I have to be there. And so that is where they first, learn to be with each other. And they have a wonderful week in Switzerland. Uh, the sad part is that he realizes he can't go back to Hungary because they are drafting people. And when he tried to talk to her about the issues of what is happening in the world, she wanted to just be romantic. And she didn't want to think about reality. She was just happy. And uh, she did not having had a father in the house. She was just basically living from day to day in this like Hollywood fairy tale that she thought was just romance. And then they had this beautiful honeymoon. And then he tells her the last day that he's not going back and that she should come with him. And she said, I haven't told my mother. And he said, I told you to tell your mother. And she said, well, you didn't tell your mother either.
So neither family was at the wedding then, when they got married.
That's right. It's not like in today's world, you know. Um, they were not. And the whole point is they were married civilly. Um, it was not a, a religious wedding. It was married, they were married civilly.
So then so he goes off, and he goes.
Well, the whole point is they have a first fight. They have a fight all day long, and then they're exhausted after they've been fighting because he has a visa to Cuba and he doesn't have a visa for her. So he said that when he gets on the ship, he'll wire his great uncle Arthur, and he'll definitely give her a visa. And she wants to know why he wouldn't have think about that or thought about that initially. So there was this whole drama, and then he said, "I told you to tell your mother," and she said, "Well, I didn't tell my mother," and there are all sorts of reasons for that, and among them that she was part of her mother's ability to maintain the apartment. So, she was bringing in some money and she was afraid to tell her mother. So she said, so he said, you can write. And she said, I can't write. I have to tell my mother in person. So that was really a incredible part.
So then you describe the story, and they separate for years.
7 years to be exact. They make an agreement that he's going to work and he's going to bring her out with her mother. The whole point is that Cuba changes their politics, and he arrived in Cuba in February of 1939. Remember, they were married in January. He arrives in February. When he arrived, I mean, he was very lucky because by May, just a few months later, the St. Louis was turned back. The St. Louis was the ship with over 950 Jewish survivors of the concentration camps that were allowed out and paid their way out or whatever, and they were returned because nobody, not Cuba, not the U.S., not Canada, not anyone. The captain of the ship sailed up and down the coast before he returned to Germany.
So now they're separated, and they do sort of, well, I would say almost miraculously manage to meet up after the war.
She just continues working, and then 1941, the mail is cut off because Hungary was considered part of the Axis powers, and they sided with Germany. And so after that, there was no communication. So he didn't even know that his mother had passed, that she had died of diabetes, and obviously during the war that there was no medication because things were not like today. And a lot of people died without medicine, and so she couldn't get medicine. So she went back and she had to face her mother and she had to face his mother. His mother was just so worried about him. Uh, and she was just, she was happy that he had gotten out.
But he does make it to the U.S., and he is in the Army now.
Right. So during, once, this is before Pearl Harbor, once the things are problematic, the U.S. takes in immigrants who are willing to fight, and you'd have to sign up for the draft. Uh, so here he escapes Hungary because he doesn't want to be in the draft. But there's a reason he doesn't want to be in the draft. It's not because he's afraid. It's because he doesn't want to fight for the wrong side. But he believes in America, and that's true because you could see all the stuff that he does. And while there was discrimination, and I wouldn't say there isn't any, but there was lots of discrimination against Jews. He felt that overall, the United States was a country that offered freedom, and he could deal with it. And so I go into what happened as he was going through basic training and how he got treated and whatever happened to the others. But the interesting thing is how the U.S. soldiers reacted to going overseas when they wanted to know why he wasn't scared. And he said, because he believed in God, and he believed that what God would ordain would be what happens. So he comforted them. And so they went from being very antagonistic to being friends. And remember, soldiers, band of brothers. So that's, that really showed through. And it didn't matter what your background was. When you're in a foxhole, you want your brother.
Right, right. So meanwhile, though, back in Hungary, his wife unfortunately ends up in a concentration camp, right?
Yes, yeah. So she was first, slowly the Germans that when they came in March of 1944 in Hungary, and they immediately enacted, laws, and they put Jews in ghettos and stuff, and she met a lot of historical figures because she met Wallenberg, not personally, but she saw him, and he was trying to do a Swedish diplomat who was trying to get Jews, and get what's called a Schutzpass, and I write all that. Um, she works in a factory for the Nazis because they took over everything, and she was working garment factory for soldiers' uniforms. Anyway, the bottom line is that she was taken around November to Bergen-Belsen, and there I described the horrible conditions under which she was taken, along with all the other people. You know, they didn't understand what was happening to them because no one could believe that this was what was happening. So it was really horrendous. Um, I just don't even know how people survived the concentration camp.
I want to just backtrack a little bit and just ask you, like, because when people read the book, it reads sort of like a novel. So, how did you piece together all this information?
Well, I did a lot of sleuthing. So I started my parents' marriage certificate, and I checked into all of that. And then I went on to uh, find out what was happening. Now, my father had talked about the Battle of the Bulge, and my brother remembers all of that. But, when we were growing up, it was like not in our foremost mind as Americans, and we were both born here. We were worried about ourselves. You know, we were worrying about our future. I mean, as kids are rather selfish. And we heard all these stories, and for instance, one of the values that my father said is, "I'm giving you all my time." And that's the greatest present of all, you know. So my brother and I looked at each other. My brother's older, and he and I looked at each other and said, that's a real present time." But now, in retrospect, it is the greatest present, because if you can understand that there's a finite time in everybody's life, that they're alive, and if they give you time, it was that's the most amazing present, because there's no other present that could equal. that.
So they came to eventually to Astoria in Queens, New York. But to your point now, I think it's people talk about doing memoirs, and people talk about what you're talking about is sort of what's often considered like a legacy or an ethical will, where it's like
Right.
yeah, you can give your children your assets, but what you're talking about is who they were, and so it took you quite a while to do this. I think you did it. You had the time and the energy in retirement from your other job to do it. But your decision to when you decided to do it and why you decided to do it this way.
Well, I first heard the story when my cousin's husband asked my parents how they met up after World War II, because he knew that she was in a concentration camp, and he also knew that my father was an American soldier. So when he talked about how they actually met up after the war, I mean, he said, this is a Hollywood movie. So I was 14 at the time. And I thought to myself, I was a good writer. And, I had always won awards for writing and things like that. But I was thinking about it, and I said to myself, someday I'm going to, I'm going to write this. But life intervened. I had three major medical crises as the time passed. Um, my parents also had medical crises. Um, I had a family, and my first husband had a medical crisis. Uh, that it really it all took its toll, and I always tried to do my very best. I knew I had to work to get ahead, to have something to move into the middle class, because I would say we were not in the middle class. Although we owned a home, it was rented out to others, so help pay the mortgage. Uh, the issue was that we really needed to be there for each other, and I think we were, and I finally I have to say that I since 14, I used to collect stories and write little notes and whatever, but nothing to sit down and therefore write it. When I retired, and that was a couple of years ago, I decided that I have to do this now, and that's how it worked out.
Yeah, and uh, you know what? I think we're going to just take a quick break. We'll use this as a good segue to come back to part two. So, folks, don't go away. We have much more with Jan Hennick and her book, To Enduring Love, about her two parents and how they came to America. Um, so, don't go away. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Are you caring for an aging loved one? It can feel overwhelming, but you don't have to do it alone. Ron's book, The Caregiving Navigator, is a step-by-step guide designed to help you plan, prepare, and provide compassionate care with confidence. From organizing family conversations to navigating long-term care and finding support for yourself, the caregiver, it's all here. Find The Caregiving Navigator now on Amazon and take the first step toward peace of mind.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. I'm Ron Rowell. We're talking with Jan Hennick about her book, To Enduring Love. Before the break, we were talking about how she came to write the book after thinking about it for many years. So I wanted to just ask you, I know, Jen, that you had opportunity to do it a different way, but and have your mother kind of talk about her experience in the concentration camp, but you decided instead you wanted to do it your way. So explain that.
Well, I really wanted to make sure that my father's role was clear, and I think that my mother would not have survived if it wasn't for my father. He was always able to be counted on. So, without giving away the book, whatever he did, people in his unit felt that he didn't find her in Bergen-Belsen because there were three trains out of Bergen-Belsen to Theresienstadt, which was another camp, which was north. And each train was liberated except for the third train that she was on. That was liberated by the Russians. So the first two were liberated by the Americans or the British, and, or I should say the Allies. But the key is that the third train was my mother had told me that the train was strafed, and she didn't know who had strafed it or whatever. But the point is that it was bombarded, and she survived, and she didn't know how she survived, and she didn't know how she got into this field. But she was in a field looking at a farmhouse, thinking of how hungry and thirsty, and just didn't know how to be. And she was picked up by the Russians, but she doesn't remember anything beyond looking at the farmhouse and thinking to herself that, I need to be there. And they took her to a Russian hospital. So the fact is that my father needed to find a way to although the Russians were allies, he needed to find a way to get to the Russian side. And I say side because that there were all sorts of concerns, and that's all part of the story.
Right. So they meet up again, and so you wanted to tell your father's story too. You didn't want it to just be about your mother and her basically telling the story of the concentration camp.
Saved her from the Russian hospital. She had suffered a stroke, and in the hospital. I mean, not in the hospital. They were taking care of her in the hospital, but it was a field hospital, so she had to get out of there because I don't think that she would have survived.
Okay. Okay. So let's jump ahead a little bit. People can read to fill in the pages of the book. They should buy the book on Amazon. We'll tell about that later. But essentially, let's switch a little bit. So now your parents come to America. They're in Astoria, Queens, in Long Island. Well, the city part of Long Island. And what I found interesting about the book too, and you're telling me about it, is it's an interesting immigrant story. About how immigrants came together after the war. Interestingly, my grandparents met in Brooklyn. My father's mother was from Hungary, and my grandfather was from Mexico, and it was it was, and I think actually Queens even today, these areas are among the most diverse in the country. So tell us about, so you're growing up with your parents and how they kind of shaped you and what you learned from them, looking back now.
Well, it was so, I think I told you I had a wonderful childhood, not because I had everything, but most of all, there was always food on the table, and I knew I was loved. I mean, no matter how hard parents worked, and my mother was a housewife, and because she was, paralyzed on her left side, that she uh, couldn't work because that nobody would give her a job. The issue with my father was that he was a musician, and he found that he couldn't have steady work. In addition to which, he got more religious when he realized that he didn't have steady work and it wasn't worth it to hang around the union hall waiting to be called. So he went to work in a factory. Um, I think that one of the things that I loved about my childhood was the diversity. And I could think of all the names. I still recall house by house, all the names, everybody from Hungarian and Irish and Italian and they say Hungarian or whatever, Greek, you name it, house by house, we all live side by side. And one of the things was that everybody, or almost everybody, had been a soldier. So we all put out the flag every single holiday. The flag was definitely out. And one of the nice things was that we played soldier. Everybody had uniforms, so we all borrowed our parents' uniforms. I mean, our fathers, for the most part. And so we played soldier. So it was really great. And I always appreciate the fact that I grew up like that. One of the things about my parents was that they were very proud to be Americans, and they didn't take it for granted. They definitely wanted to reflect to us, my brother and myself, how great it was. So it starts with my brother being named George after George Washington. My father felt that George Washington was the first person in his life who actually he was a Mason, and he actually realized that it was terribly important to have freedom of religion, and that they should all be able to practice the way you wanted to practice your religion. So he named him George, and he felt that if he would be as honest as George was, despite the fact that that was a made-up story by Parson Weems about his chopping down the cherry tree, but that really exemplified his life, because he really was an honest and caring human being. So, I mean, I watch all of the different takes on George Washington, and I think I think that he would be appalled at some of the things that were said about him. But in essence, what he felt was said to the Truro synagogue. He wrote a letter to them, and that's on the wall of the Truro synagogue, about freedom of religion. A lot of other values that my father exemplified. People asked when he was on the ship, aren't you afraid or whatever? And he had said, well, I believe in God, and I believe that God will do whatever is right. I mean that type of faith. So he didn't worry about anything. And he said there are no heroes. He said there are only people who do the right thing when called upon. So I really, really always appreciated his take on heroes, because no one starts out saying, "Oh, I'm going to be a hero." You know? And a lot of people died, too many, and it was a horrible war. But they fought for some real reason, and there was a real view that, when they died, there was no the sadness was mitigated by the fact that they were fighting for a real cause, and that was freedom. So that was that. My mother felt that, she said to me, money is power. And I thought about that, because she felt that I wasted my money that I earned. But I felt that if it made somebody happy, I thought that was the right thing to do. If you cared about somebody and you use your money to do the right thing, and when I say right thing, it was different. But she had a view that money is power, because not having had the money, she couldn't get out of Hungary, and she had to wait and while my father was trying to work and earn money to bring her and her mother out. So that was uh, what 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 they said. But one of the things that I what I always said that I thought my father did great is that he would take us every week somewhere else, to the Statue of Liberty, to to the parks. He even took us to the UN. So I mean, it was at that time there was great hope for the UN. Um, the fact that it was a place to speak and to be able to resolve differences was extremely hopeful. And it was he instilled in us, and I know I can speak for my brother, that he instilled in us an understanding that America was great. I mean, it really, really was great because they came from a place where things were not great, especially for Jews. I mean, other people too, for Jews especially. And given all of that stuff, I mean, it's horrifying about anti-Semitism, that it's just continuing to rear its ugly head, and you see a lot of it. I saw a lot of it in my childhood. I didn't pay attention to it because it wasn't front and center, until after the Kennedy assassination. And then went with the Vietnam War and the other assassinations, a certain level of hopelessness entered my view of things. Uh, I had gone to, I was in the bridal party for my friend, who was having a rainbow wedding. And she was, when they have a rainbow wedding, you're in different colors. So each two people have different color dresses. So it doesn't mean rainbow like we have rainbow now. It meant that you get together, and it was like a brotherhood. It was so it was on the steps of the Immaculate Conception, the church. Uh, and I'll never forget that photograph that they took. Two sisters were getting married. That they married at the same time, and then they had this rainbow wedding. Because everybody was on the steps, in different colored gowns. But at the time that I went, they had a white power. Uh, they've had a white power. Um, uh, what would you call that? A rally, and they they said, "Who's Mark Rudd? He's Jewish. Who's this?" And and when I saw people at that rally, because I had to pass the rally to get to the church, um, it was very frightening.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these things continue. The challenges continue, but I think that your parents, gifted you values that were sort of a combination of both, faith and practicality. So your mother talked about money, and I think you mentioned to me that your father, sort of like my parents, like I could think a lot of immigrants. I think your father mentioned that. I think he gave this to you. I think, as you mentioned in your story about your yearbook, yeah, man's greatest tool and strongest weapon is knowledge. And I remember my parents saying to me, in terms of my education, that an education is something no one can take away from you. So that was the importance of education was really paramount, and I think that it continues to be. And I think recognizing that this is for a lot of immigrant parents, an important lesson that's how you get ahead. It's important in terms of getting the life skills you need. So it's not. So it is faith, but it's also hard work and education.
Definitely. I couldn't agree with you more, Ron, on this subject. My father always stated, that he needed to see us successful, and the
Mm-hmm.
only way to see us successful was for us to get education.
Mm-hmm.
And I always loved that saying that he came up with for my brother: man's greatest tool and strongest weapon is
Mm-hmm.
knowledge.
Right.
He really could see beyond what was at the current time,
Mm-hmm.
and could see in the future. But he also gave us a lot of hope, as did my mother, because she was concerned about hope as the future. My mother said about hope that when she felt that she saw the Statue of Liberty, it gave
Mm-hmm.
her tremendous hope,
Mm-hmm.
because liberty, that freedom, the whole idea that you can do whatever you wanted to do within reason.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but the point is that that was tremendous for her, and I really believe that she really looked at it as a real possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were at the World's Fair, and we went to the World's Fair in 1964,
Right.
one of the themes, I guess the major theme, was it's a big, bright, beautiful tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, everybody followed that theme. And there was such hope in the world. It was amazing the amount of hope that there was.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a certain extent, we're there again,
Mm-hmm.
where we have tremendous hope. After we had a tremendous, a strong time a long time of issues,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the whole idea of hope
Yeah.
for tomorrow.
Yeah. I think that is a very American value, right? I mean, it is hard work, but it also is part of, the unity that you felt growing up in your neighborhood with all, your diverse neighbors. And I think that remains, an iconic American value. Is, despite our challenges, as we get older, we continue to have hope. And I think that, in your own career, I got a sense, you don't say it directly, but I sort of implicitly that your viewing of your parents and commitment to America and its values, in some way affected your career, because you spent a lot of, like, what, almost 40 years in public service, right? And for the FAA, is that right? Uh-huh.
And then I spent another 10 in teaching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, teaching was always my first love,
Mm-hmm.
but unfortunately, at the time that I got my license, it was the first time ever
Mm-hmm.
under Lindsay that they didn't hire teachers. In
Right.
other words, I was student teaching at John
Right.
Dewey High School,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, we'd love to hire you, but but we can't. So I took the first job I could get,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a typist in a typing pool.
Right.
And my point was just try and do the best you could,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and um, you get to the forefront by just trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you're thinking of is that in 1983, Elizabeth Dole came and took a tour
Mm-hmm.
of the FAA where I
Right.
worked, and I was in HR, human resources, and I heard her say, "Where are the women managers?"
Right. So this is
You know,
Elizabeth Dole, is
so
of course Dole's
Secretary of Transportation.
she was Secretary of Transportation
Yeah,
at the time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this was during the Reagan
right,
years, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. But she used to be a Democrat. In other words, I looked her up when I thought about her, because I mean, some of her ideas are very much along the lines of a Democrat, but it was the Reagan administration that gave her the opportunity to be Secretary of Transportation. And I was so happy that she had come, and she said, I'm not going to promote women because they're women. I'm going to promote qualified women. And she said, if you can show that you have qualifications, um, that's fine. I started out, I was the only woman in the class for FAA. It was going to be first class of Embry-Riddle and Long Island University working together. So Embry-Riddle is an aeronautical university, and of course Long Island University, C.W. Post, is like university. So I finished. I was the only one who finished. Only one of the women who finished.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I started out being the only one, and there was no one who joined us
Mm-hmm.
over the course of 5 years. And I was given an extra year to present. Originally, they were asking for a dissertation,
Mm-hmm.
and then they allowed people to take
Right.
comprehensive exams.
Right. Yeah.
And for those who wanted to take comprehensive exams, which I was one,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I didn't have time
Right.
to at that point. I had been a manager, and I was on these various projects and traveling, and I took the comprehensive exams
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and got my diploma.
Yeah. Yeah.
But aside from all that, um, she established certain programs, and among those programs were the Women's Executive Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And she thought that she looked at herself, and she felt that she really tried very hard. She was top of her class, which is what I was,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
undergraduate, graduate. Uh, she really believed in women being qualified. I mean, not just because you're a woman, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't,
Right.
you know, it doesn't really matter. But the whole point was that thinking about the mindset was an important point for
Right.
her.
Yeah.
And I headed up the first women's executive leadership program
Mm-hmm.
for my area. And a lot of talented women came through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
What I was known for was, and if you look up my name in the FAA annals, I had the suspected unapproved parts team, which was a major program about getting unapproved parts for aircraft. So, you know, when you don't, when something goes wrong, you need a part, and you don't go on to Steers to get a part. You know, whether it's a hose, a small hose, or something major, pedo tube. I mean, it was like you really don't. So, I mean, what you really needed to do is to make sure that the people getting the parts and replacing the parts were qualified, and every part has a birth certificate. So it's born.
Right. These are airplane parts,
So,
right? Is that right? Airplane parts.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but let me just say that for people, if you go to my website 45forward.org, you can see that we list the episode, and there's a little bit of bio about Jan, so you can read a little bit more about her bio there if you want to fill in the some of the background. So I think that you carried on, even though you obviously weren't in the military, but I hear in your voice you're carrying on your legacy, your parents, through service. You don't need to be a soldier, but your sense of serving and teaching, and also, listen, having safe planes is a big part of our country. So I think that those values of sort of practicality, but also attention to what's the right thing to do. Any last thoughts on how you look at how your parents helped build you in terms of your values, and I have to say your resilience, your sense of purpose and resilience.
The most important thing is
Mm-hmm.
I think that my parents taught me not to judge a book by its cover.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so when people try to put you in categories like Jew, woman, whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, my parents always said it's not who you are, but what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I always believed in work times effort equals results.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that was the formula that I lived by.
Mm-hmm.
I try to explain both in my work life and in my teaching that that was the formula that led to success.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly felt that if you followed that, you'd be very successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you did. And in spite of, along with all your challenges that you had some significant challenges yourself.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I and that really I really owe to my mother
Mm-hmm.
because when I was going to give up, because I had been very sick a number of times,
Mm-hmm.
and when I got out of the hospital one time, they had because I used to be in the hospital a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't miss work,
Mm-hmm.
so they would pump me full of cortisone,
Mm-hmm.
and this one time, I mean, it was like I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't, I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
think. I couldn't. It was just so horrible. And I said to my mother, I can't go on. I can't go on like this. I just
Mm-hmm.
can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I never saw her get angry, but she got really angry this
Mm-hmm.
time with me.
Wow.
And she was like, amazing. And she said, you can't go on. How do you think I felt when I was in Bergen-Belsen?
Wow.
How do you think that I managed to go on? I mean, and then she opened up a little bit about what had occurred,
Mm-hmm.
and it really made me realize that you can do anything that you put your mind to.
Mm-hmm.
That if you believe that you can, you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as bad as I felt, and well, I felt really horrible. Uh, I really didn't know how I would go on, but my mother shocked me
Mm-hmm.
into believing this is not the way to be, and
Mm-hmm.
I overcame that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back to what you said earlier, which is, your sense of both your parents' courage is, you're ordinary people, doing extraordinary things. And so,
Ordinary people,
right, right.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to thank you for a terrific conversation, Jan. Very thought provoking. I loved the overall story of both your parents and you, and your determination to write it. Because I think
Def-
these are the stories, ordinary stories that us ordinary people need to read for inspiration. So let me just say, if people have comments or questions for you, how did they get in touch with you, Jan?
Jan Hennick, yes, Jan Hennick at gmail.com. Um, I'll be glad to answer any questions you have or whatever you want me to comment on. Um, you can get my book on Amazon.com. You can download it to as uh, what is the ebook?
Right. Yeah. And I noticed when I went to the site, there's a sample. People can actually download a sample from your
Oh,
site.
absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I meant to tell you, I felt I was channeling my parents when I wrote it,
Mm-hmm.
because you had asked me about how I wrote it, and I felt like every time I was writing one person's segment, like my mother's or my father's,
Mm-hmm.
I felt I wasn't at a loss for words. I
Mm.
just was able to write smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I felt I was channeling a different parent at a different time.
Wow. Interesting. Nice. Nice. Okay. Well, folks, again, thanks so much, Jan, for a great conversation.
Thank you, Ron.
Um, and once again, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm Ron at 45forward.org, and you can see a full archive of my shows. And for if people missed our conversation actually today, they can always see it by going to 45forward.org, part of my archive of all my shows. So if you again, as we go forward with this inspiration from Jan, until the next time, keep moving forward, 45 forward.